Hi, everyone. I'm Belkis Choiseul-Praslin. I am the Teacher Education Program Lead at Benner College at the University of the Pacific. Along with teaching at UOP, I also engage in research in the areas of special education, transition, inclusive college for students with intellectual disabilities, and teacher preparation. Most of the research I conduct or support utilizes quantitative methods. In my research-related work, I am constantly thinking about how to better collect and clean data and making sure that I am accurately interpreting and reporting findings. And more importantly, trying to communicate what that data shows with others. That is, in a nutshell, what our first session is going to be about. Reading and understanding quantitative research well enough to evaluate the choices researchers made and decide what those findings actually mean for your practice. By the end of this video, you should be able to recognize how quantitative methods show up in scholarly articles, how to read tables and figures for actual meaning rather than just scanning the numbers, and interpret results in relation to the research questions being asked. So I want to start with a quick scenario. I'm guessing most of you have either lived this reality or maybe one day will. It's July 1st, just imagine. You're finally starting to decompress from your school year. Maybe you're on a beach. Maybe you're just enjoying the fact that you slept past 6 a.m. for the first time in months. And then you get an email. All of a sudden, this horrible noise. And it's an email from your principal. The good news when you read it is that your assignment for the fall is what you expected. There's no surprises there. That's great. Take a moment to take a deep breath because not everyone gets to say that. I hope that doesn't happen to you all, but sometimes assignments and grade levels and expectations change. But you read on in your email and there is a catch. And what you see is that you are now going to be required to use a new curriculum, and attached to the email is a research report. The principal says that the data supports this program. They're hyping it up. It's great. We're going to use this and it's going to help all of our kids. Maybe that report has a chart. Maybe there's a table of numbers. Maybe there's some sentence in there somewhere that says there are statistical findings. However, if you don't have the skills to read that report yourself and do some basic understanding and interpretation of it, you are basically going to have to take someone else's word for it. And that might be fine. Maybe your principal's great and they know how to pick a great curriculum, a wonderful principal would. However, it might not be fine. You really wouldn't know this until after you've done all this training and preparation and work and 3 months in using it consistently. And as you're told, something isn't working. Your kids aren't doing better. They aren't learning. They seem stagnant and lost because this curriculum isn't giving them specifically what suits them or what they need. But by then, time has passed. Time that could have been differently used. And now we have to find ways to support students in lieu of what we have not been able to utilize well. Time. But if you do have the skills to open up a report and read it and understand what it's telling you, even at a basic level, you are able to ask questions before that school year starts. You are able to push back if something doesn't add up. You can try to advocate. You can do your best. When I say try to advocate, it's, in my opinion, something we should always do. We should always continue to advocate for our students. And we may not always win, but we should never really stop. But understanding there's a lot of other factors that go in place. But you showed up and you showed up informed and you were ready to have a conversation and you're ready to defend whether or not this might be supportive to your students. Within your locus of control, that's what you can do as your teacher. And really, that's the skill that we are working on building on. Not just for this class, but hopefully for every professional decision you'll be asked to make or accept or help take part in some form or fashion from here on out. So before we get into specific mechanics, I do want to plant one idea that will change, hopefully, how you read quantitative articles from this point forward. Results and interpretation are not the same thing, and they do not live in the same place. It's important to know this. The results section is going to show you what the numbers say, and the discussion section is going to be where the researcher tells us what they think those numbers mean, how they have interpreted those numbers to mean something. That distinction is incredibly important, and although for some feels quite obvious, for many who are not as used to reading research articles, that it may be great to have said out loud. So we're saying it out loud. The distinction matters because numbers don't interpret themselves. A researcher makes choices about what to emphasize, what to downplay, and what to claim. Your job as an educated reader is to look at those results yourself and ask, does what they're claiming actually match what the numbers show? The question is, what turns reading research into something useful instead of something you just get through? That question is what turns reading research into something useful instead of something you just get through. Now, when most people pick up a research article, they head straight to the abstract or skip right to the findings. But for quantitative studies, I want to invite you to try a different approach because I think it will actually make reading the whole thing a lot easier. And it's to start with the methods section. The methods section is the foundation of the entire study. It tells you who was in the study, how many participants, what was measured, and how that study was designed. Once you have that context, everything in the results starts to make a lot more sense. Without it, it's kind of like getting this punchline without the setup. The joke lands differently when you don't know what came before it. So from there, we're going to move on to the results section. And here is where we start to see patterns. We're looking for patterns. Then on to the discussion section, and this is where the researcher shares what they think it all means. A simple way to think about this is that methods tell you how much to trust it, results tell you what happened, and the discussion tells you what the researcher thinks. Once you start reading quantitative research articles in this way, I hope that you'll find that the results section feel a lot less overwhelming because you already know the context going in. All right, so walking through this together section by section, we're going to try to think of the research article like a house. The method section is going to be our foundation. The results is the walls that are built on that foundation. And the discussion section is the roof that puts it all together. If your foundation is shaky, everything that is built on top of it is worth a second look. So when you are in the method section, you're looking for three main things. The first one is your sample. Who participated? Where were they? How many people? This matters more than you might realize. A study of 12 teachers at one school is telling a very different kind of story than a study that uses 1,200 teachers across 5 different states. One is not automatically better than the other, but the size and source of the sample shapes how far you can take the findings. Context matters quite a bit. From there, don't just stop at the number. Ask yourself, does this sample actually look like my students, my school, my community? A study conducted entirely in a well-resourced suburban district is not going to translate as cleanly to an urban school with high rates of students with disabilities or English learners. If the sample doesn't reflect your context, it does not disqualify it from being useful, but it does change how much weight you should give it. And again, that's the context that really matters. So I also would want you here to look at how the participants were recruited. Did the researchers go out and find a representative group? Were they people who were willing? Are they anonymous? Was it something made out of a study conducted with convenience samples, which are basically whoever showed up or whoever the researchers had immediate access to? Those are really common in some educational research, and they're fine, but they do limit how broadly you can apply the findings. So second would be the measures. What did the researchers actually collect? Was it survey responses, test scores, observational data? Knowing this helps you understand what the numbers are actually capturing. Now, just because something was measured doesn't mean it was measured well. Another thing to ask yourself when you're looking at this method section is whether the tool the researchers were using actually captures what it says it was capturing. So if a study claims to have measured student engagement, but the only data that they collected was attendance, that's worth questioning because we're only defining student engagement as attendance in this case? Question mark. Good studies will tell you something about whether their measures were valid and reliable, or if they were newly made, they will explain very explicitly the process that was done to create the tool that they are using. You don't need to always understand the technical details, but if they don't mention it at all, that's actually kind of a red flag, and you want to make a note of that. Third, in the method section is the design. What was the study trying to do? Was it trying to compare two groups? Was it trying to track how something changes over time? Or examine whether two or more things are related? The design tells you what kind of question the study was built to answer. And just as importantly, what questions it's not answering. This is where sometimes people can overclaim that they found something in their data, and we have to then go back to the design and see exactly what they did and what they can claim. A study that was designed to look at relationships between variables cannot tell you that one thing caused another. That's a design question, not a statistics question. And the method section is where you would find this information. After you have gone through your method section, you can move over to your results. And here you're going to run into two different types of statistics typically. The first is called a descriptive statistics. Descriptive statistics are your kind of friendly, approachable statistics. There are averages, percentages, counts, and they paint a big picture of what your sample and results look like. And then we have inferential statistics, and these are your more ambitious statistics. We're taking it up a notch. We'll see lots of different tests will fall in here, but in education and especially teacher-based studies, we see more often reported t-tests, ANOVAs, regressions, chi-squares, and some others, of course. These type of tests help researchers draw conclusions beyond just the people in that study. And you'll also find your tables and figures that add into this and help you get a better visual understanding. After reading your results, you're going to move over to your discussion. In the discussion section, this is where the researcher is making their case. It's their chance to say, here's what I think this means. The limitation section in that discussion area is also incredibly important, but some people kind of skip it sometimes. I think the limitation section is so important. It is not a confession of failure, never at all. Hopefully, please don't think of it that way. A limitation section is a chance to address why your study isn't somehow the most perfect study in the world, what could be done better, what makes the results something that we have to look at contextually. It is a sign that the researchers are being straight with you. If a study has no limitations or like very basic limitations, that should give you some pause, not confidence. It's really important to note that from a research article. Okay, so in a paper, especially in a quantitative paper, you are likely to run into tables because we love a good table. So we're going to talk about some tables here. Because I know that this is a place where some people feel like they hit a wall. A lot of it is approachable, but then you will go and see a big dense grid of numbers and abbreviations, and you're not really sure where to start. It can kind of feel like you accidentally walked into someone's like Excel spreadsheet or something. So here's the approach that I want you to try. Instead of reading everything at once, ask 4 questions first. So the first one is, what are the variables? What is this table actually about? What is being measured or compared? Just first identify what are the variables. Then if there are abbreviations, and if it is a quantitative table, it's so likely that there are going to be abbreviations. What do those abbreviations mean? Things like N, you'll see an N capitalized and sometimes an N. Sometimes you will see the N capitalized and other times you would not. The N is a sample size. Then we'll have the percent symbol. Many might be familiar with that one. The M, capital M, is going to be for mean or average, and SD is going to be for standard deviation. Standard deviation is a measure of how spread out those numbers are. These show up in very nearly almost every table that you'll read, so getting comfortable with at minimum these here goes a very long way. The third question to ask is, what comparison is being made? Are we looking at two groups side by side or two or more groups? Are we looking at the same group at different time points? Are there multiple conditions that the participants were put under? Understanding what the comparison tells us, understanding the comparison tells you what the table is trying to show. And the fourth question to ask, and this is the biggest one probably, what is the key pattern? This is, I feel, where some novice readers of quantitative research might get stuck because they might believe that they need to understand every single number before they can really say anything about the table or try to extract anything meaningful from it. And you don't. A key pattern is just the most meaningful difference or trend that you can pick out. And typically, because it's numbers, you're going up or down, either a high number or a low number. So here's how to spot one. You're going to start reading row by row. Let your eyes move across. Ask, what are the big differences? Where are things close together? If one group has a mean of 82 and another group has a mean of 47, that gap is telling you something might be worth paying attention to. If two groups look almost identical, that's a pattern. Next, you'd be looking for consistency. Does the same group come out higher or stronger across multiple rows? A pattern that shows up once might be interesting. A pattern that shows up across several variables is worth noting. You're also going to want to pay attention to sample sizes alongside the numbers. A big difference between two groups sounds impressive until you realize one group had 9 people in it and the other had 100. The pattern might be real, but the size of the group shapes how much confidence you can have in it. You are not trying to explain why the pattern exists. That's the discussion section's job. Your job in the results section is just to see it clearly and ask whether it is consistent, meaningful, and supported by the numbers in front of you. And when you run into a symbol or an abbreviation you don't recognize, look it up, Google it. It will take 30 seconds at most. The more that you encounter the terms like SD or DF, degrees of freedom, or CI, confidence intervals, the more familiar you're going to become with them. But you do not ever need to have them memorized, not today or any day really. What you need is the habit of not skipping past something you don't understand. You see something you don't understand, you go look for the answer, and then you come back and put it in context. I am going to walk you through a real table in just a minute so we can put some of these skills to work here. But first, I want to make sure you have something useful in your hands that you can actually use beyond this video. I put together a reference sheet that covers the key terms, statistics, and tests I have started to cover, and they go in a little bit more in this document here. It is organized into sections, so hopefully you can find what you need quickly. The examples are framed around reading and interpreting research, not running it yourself per se. There are a few things I want to flag. Here's key terminology. Section 3 is our descriptive statistics. This section has symbols for what will most often be seen in tables, things like the M for mean, SD for standard deviation. There's variance, count. Sometimes you might see the N in capital and lowercase, as well as percentage here. Tried to also include some teacher examples, so you might relate a little bit more to it on your side. There's a section here on interpreting p-values and effect size, and section 5 having common inferential tests. These are many different common tests that you'll see in educational-based research. And then in section 6, reminder of the questions we've just gone over, things that you might be wanting to ask, and a section for common red flags to watch out for. This is not a reference sheet that you need to memorize. You won't be quizzed or tested on it, but hopefully serves as a useful tool to you as you read and review research. Because again, it's not our job to know all of the statistics or know how to do statistics. We're not statisticians, we're teachers. But it is our job to understand and interpret them as far as it applies to our positions as teachers. And so this sheet hopefully will help you get a little start on that if you need a refresher at any point. So I want to pause on 2 things that trip people up, even experienced readers of statistical educational related research. The first is going to be p-value. When you see p less than 0.05 in a table, That means that the researchers found that the pattern that they observed was statistically unlikely due to random chance. That's it. It doesn't tell you whether the finding matters or not. And it doesn't tell you whether the difference that they found is large or meaningful in practice. That's a very important distinction. It just says that something is statistically significant, meaning that is likely not due to random chance. A study might find a statistically significant difference in test scores between two groups. But if the actual difference is 2 points on a 100-point scale, we would maybe ask if that was a very meaningful finding. And that's where we want to bring in effect sizes. Effect sizes will tell you how big the difference actually is, how much weight to kind of give in there. The other one that we'll also very likely see is a confidence interval, often seen as CI, the abbreviations. Confidence intervals give you a sense of how precise the estimate is. If the interval is very wide, the estimate is less certain. None of this, again, means that you need to be a statistician. It means you need to read the numbers and ask, so what? And then in that asking of so what, figuring out how much does it actually matter for your students in your classroom and your practice. Now, I want to do a quick practice together. I'm going to walk you through a table from a study I published with other faculty at UOP. The study we did examined the role of mentorship in preparation programs for pre-service special education teachers, very specifically. The part 2 of this video goes into this a little bit more, but for this exercise, I want to use table 2 as an example. Take a moment to look through this table here before I walk through it. What do you notice? What do you recognize? And what is unfamiliar? All right, looking at our table here, the first thing I notice is that we have 3 rows, one for each outcome that was measured in this study. There's mentorship, that's research question 1. We have readiness to teach, and that's research question 2. And then readiness to teach diverse populations, that's also part of research question 2. Now, next we have our columns here that show us the pre-survey and post-survey mean and standard deviations. So in this study, a group of pre-service teachers were asked to complete a survey on the general perceptions on these 3 areas. And looking here at mentorship for the first one, we'll see that before teachers started their mentorship, they were rating their perceptions of mentorship overall as a 3.56 out of 5. So that's just generally how they felt. And that would roughly equate to indifference, a 3.5 out of 5. And then when we asked them how they felt about mentorship after participating in the experience, we see that the average score went up, the mean score went up. We go from 3.56 to 4.24 out of 5 points. After this, we're going to kind of scoot our eyes over to the thing that is bolded in the table, and that is the p-value. The p-value is, again, what tells us our significance. To know what less than 0.001 means, we can refer to our sheet on section 4, and we can see that there's a less than 0.1 chance that our result was due to a fluke or random error, meaning this is very strong evidence, given this information just here right now. In this study, the effect size is reported within the text of the results and not in the table, and that's quite common. Effect size is often reported in the results. Sometimes it is in tables. It's kind of up to the researcher's discretion. In this case, this had a medium effect size. And we would do that kind of same similar analysis for each row and column of relevance once we kind of have a handle on what we're seeing. So if we look at the next section, which is readiness to teach, we see that at the pre-survey section, pre-service teachers rated their readiness to teach overall a 2.85 out of 5 points. And then after the mentorship experience, they were rating themselves higher, a 3.25 out of 5 points. However, is that a very high significant difference? We would have to see what the effect size is to confirm. Even if we'll see here that there is significance, that this section here did reach significance. And then we look at the last part here, the readiness to teach diverse populations. So the teachers were asked, how ready do you feel to teach diverse students from diverse backgrounds? And on the pre-survey, teachers felt quite neutral. I suppose, about their readiness to teach. They had a 3.33 out of 5. And interestingly, at the post survey, this average score went down, where teachers said that they had a 3.27 readiness to teach out of 5. And this result was not statistically significant because, well, it goes down, but also they're very close to one another. It's a very minute difference there in people who said that they had a difference or that there was a difference at all. The absence of change tells us something just as important as the presence of change here. Mentorship improved some things, like overall perception of how mentorship works or how beneficial it might be, and overall teacher perception of being ready to teach, or new teacher perception of being ready to step into the classroom. However, it also tells us that this mentorship program, as described and as studied here, is also not preparing their teachers as well in teaching diverse students of diverse populations. And that is an incredibly important finding as well. So most quantitative findings are going to fall into one of 3 categories. A difference claim says that one group of condition produced different outcomes than another. A relationship claim is going to say that 2 variables tend to move together in some direction. And a change claim says that something shifted over time. When you're reading, figure out which type of claim the researcher is trying to make. Then check whether the statistics they're using actually match that claim. I want to leave you with something practical here. This sentence frame is one of the most useful tools I think I can give you for translating research into something that you can actually use and communicate. The first sentence names the patterns. What did the numbers show? In this study, researchers found that. What is the key pattern? The second sentence moves to meaning. What does that suggests in plain language? This suggests that what? And that what should be understood by you, by me, by my grandmother, by a typical 8th grader going on forward. And then the third sentence, this is the one that most people skip. And it's the one that sometimes it's hardest. And it's also the one that adds, I think, the appropriate caution needed. It tells us what we can and cannot conclude given how the study was designed and who was in it. Because the study used this type of design or measure, we can conclude that this is an effective tool for this population, or this would not be an effective tool for all populations or my populations. I want to model this with you a little bit with the table from that study I just showed you with your professors here. In that study, the researchers, myself, and again, your professors, found that pre-service special education teachers reported significantly stronger perceptions of mentorship after a year-long mentorship experience with a medium effect size. This suggests that structured mentorship during that teacher preparation time period may increase candidates' positive views of mentorship as a professional support. Because the study used a small sample size from a single program, we cannot conclude that those findings generalize to all teacher preparation contexts. However, and this is my new addition to this, within the University of the Pacific's program, we can use that information to make decisions and to make changes and to generalize, because there was a point where 10 was a total number of students we had. And so they were everyone, and they told us everything that we could do from there. Contextually important to us in that setting may not be, again, translatable to all, but might give insight. So if you see how that works, it is specific and it protects you from overclaiming, from saying something a little outside of your scope. And that is exactly how you should be, hopefully, approaching interpreting some of the quantitative research that you are coming across in your own assignments.